Hello everyone and welcome to episode 12 of Runetalker. I'm Maitland, joined as always by Simon.
Hey everyone.
And we are back for another week 12. So we're here, it's fresh after the second seasonal, so we're going to discuss our quite impressive runs in that tournament, and then we'll talk about how the meta is sitting at the moment for a bit, and then we're going to move into all of the new cards that are coming out, because there's a massive new expansion coming out in just over a week, and I'm very excited for it. What about you, Simon?
Yeah, I think it should be great. It's awesome getting a new region. That's pretty exciting.
Yep, a new region, new champions, new everything, some very new mechanics and stuff. So yeah, it's going to be super fun. Why don't we get started on the seasonal? How did you? Well, we both ended up 3-2, so that's should I have not spoiled that? I don't know how we're gonna.
You've ruined the episode. Yeah. Yeah, so we both ended up 3-2. You
had a much better run than I did, though.
Yeah, at one point I was 3-0, so that the hope was alive for a little bit. But we ended up both playing the same lineup. So we talked about different lineups and deck choices a bit last week. So we ended up playing a pretty similar lineup to what we were suggesting last week. So we both played Fiora Shen, we played Fizz TF, and then as our third deck, we ended up playing Tahm Kench Aphelios, which isn't really a deck that was, really on anyone's radar, but Kevor, who is often rank 1 or rank 2 on the ladder, basically came up with the list. It's basically TF Aphelios, but instead of running Twisted Fate, you run Tahm Kench in that slot. So we've seen some decks like that before, so the Diana Aphelios deck basically does the same thing and runs Diana in that slot and still lets you pull, box to pusses out of your deck with Crescendum. But Tahm Kench was a really interesting choice because Tahm is really strong against Aphelios, and it's also pretty good against Twisted Fate, and also really strong against Lee Sin. So we figured adding a Tahm Kench might be more impactful than running a Diana, and we thought that it filled out our lineup quite well.
Yeah, and for people that love passing the turn as much as we do, Tahm Kench is just a perfect champion because so often it's correct to... you can use the Tahm spell and it has a good impact on the board, but the threat of activation of it, while you're holding it, your opponent just can't really do anything good, like develop Twisted Fate. You just can't do into a Tahm, and so... once you get slightly ahead in the matchup, particularly in the mirror, it's just a real mirror breaker and just a really strong card in a lot of matchups. So, yeah, I thought that was a really cool list that I think you found, Simon, from watching Kevor stream, and he ended up going 5-0, running a similar lineup to us. He had Lee Sin over Fiora Shen.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a really fun deck as well. You can do some really cool things with it. For instance, Tahm Kench plus Veiled Temple. You can get a huge Tahm. You don't really have that many ways to heal Tahm in the deck, but that's not really your goal. One really cool thing you can do to heal Tahm is using your Aphelios weapons to give extra toughness to Tahm when it's already taken damage. So Severum gives +2 damage, and then I don't even know the name of the Overwhelm weapon, but it gives +1 toughness as well. So... keep that in mind if you do end up playing with the deck, because you'll win a lot more games if you start looking for those spots.
Yeah, that was a fun one we were playing the other day, and playing this list. I think I was piloting, trying to get some reps in, and I started doing that to heal up my units, and you were just like blown away. And I mean, that's just one of the things that once Aphelios flips, you have so many options, and so you can cast so many spells that it's really important that you start looking for where you can get those incremental pieces of value. One of the ones that comes up a lot with Aphelios is, do I want to just cast... again, I don't know the name of the trample Aphelios spell either. Do I want to just cast that on my opponent's attack turn at the end of turn for no value, just so that I can set up the right phased weapon for my full turn cycle next turn? And I think that's... I think Aphelios is probably... It's probably a bit too strong at the moment, and it's probably going to get nerfed. But one of the things that is really important, especially with strong cards, is that you can play Aphelios at a medium level, and it's still going to be very, very, very strong. But there's just so much the ceiling on how good you can get with Aphelios, particularly at the moment with how strong it is just sky high. And so I'd really recommend just, playing a lot with the deck and trying to think about your lines, which gets really tough because you often have like 10 cards in hand and you've got like a million options, but just trying to think through some of the different lines. And we've found playing together on Discord really powerful because you and I play the deck totally differently. All our friends, there's just so many lines that it's going to be very frequently that you're going to see a totally different line to what you'd considered. And that doesn't mean it's necessarily better or worse, and it's hard to tell. But the more that you see those different lines, you'll start to see them come up yourself, and it'll just give you more options to try and find some optimal lines.
Yeah, definitely. And Aphelios is just such a complicated card. And like you were saying, even if you're not playing it at 100%, you're still going to win a lot of games because it gives you a huge advantage. So I think you've made the comment before that, a random number generator picking which cards we play could probably win the game from here. And that can definitely be true. So, don't get intimidated that, there are 100 different, lines I could take over this turn and next turn. Because at the end of the day, probably every card in your hand is really good. So if you cast it, you're going to be in an all right spot.
I don't know if that's great advice for getting better. I think you should still try and be
thinking. Oh yeah. I'm just saying. Don't be intimidated.
I do get frustrated when we're playing and you'll tank on some. There's times where you do tank and you've just like. You could AFK and you're going to win the game. That's a bit different, though.
Look, there's nothing I hate more than losing a one game. So,
so I think TF Aphelios is probably the deck that we'd recommend most for ladder at the moment. If you're interested in our lineups, we tweeted them from the Runetalker account, so you can check those out there. And we'll post our current list of TF Aphelios in the show notes. It's just we're both in Diamond 1 with our Smurfs at the moment, desperately trying to get those extra cosmetics, the 2 extra max chests that you get when you get to Master, so we're trying to lock those in before the end of the season. And I think TF Aphelios is probably what we're going to play till we get there. I believe that Steve Rubin was streaming today and said that there was only going to be one card nerfed in the next patch with the new cards, and I think the first one we'd go to is probably that Boxtopus will become on summon, take 3 damage instead of on
play.
On play, yeah. And I think that was a nerf we talked about before. I think that's the most obvious thing to me. That's the thing in the meta that just feels the most broken.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel fair to get a 3/4 Boxtopus down. Even when you are, some of the time you just play it off of gifts from beyond. You don't even, find your Aphelios and you still get the turn 3/4 Boxtopus, which, isn't necessarily the best because it's costing you 4 mana, but having that flexibility and later on in the game being able to find a Gravitum to save your life and buy you an extra turn. I mean, having that flexibility, I think, makes gifts very strong.
Yeah, I was initially a bit not convinced about gifts, but having 2 in our current list, I've really liked it. It's just so strong, and it sets up turns where you get to play two weapons, double crescendum or similar lines, and because the weapons they're all quite good efficient cards, and so being able to do that more often is just it's just a good, really flexible card. So it's really impressed me.
Yeah, for sure. I think TF Aphelios, great deck. I think we'll talk about it a little bit more later on, but just to wrap up some of our thoughts on the tournament, I think it was a lot of fun again. I really enjoyed the tournament. I personally, and I think Maitland agrees with this, I much prefer the 5-round tournament just because, living in Australia, it's really hard for us to get a tournament that has a good start time, for instance, and once you move to 9 rounds, it's almost impossible to preserve that across time zones. So, for instance, in Australia, we're starting at 8 a.m. at the moment for these tournaments, but if everything gets pushed back 4 hours and we've got to start at 4 a.m., then suddenly you might see far fewer Australians participating.
Yeah, or even playing for another 4 hours is just... And I guess it comes down to what people want from the tournament, and I think that's the one where I don't really know what people want from the tournament, because people talk about, wanting to see the best players do well, which I don't think this is really the tournament for that. I think they'll set up other invitational tournaments and stuff where if you want to see the best players play the other best players and do well, then that's the right spot for that. But this to me is more akin to a GP in Magic, where I myself would like an opportunity to, as a medium player, to do well. And the change to 9 rounds, Dr. Law's done infinite analysis and has been posting heaps of stuff about it if you're interested in looking at the numbers. And I think the last one that they posted said that basically, I think the biggest thing is people think they're better than they are. And so people think that when you reduce variance in inverted commas in a tournament, that they are going to do better because they only lose to luck, which just isn't true. Like most people here, like, and most people in the world, like, even if it is 5 rounds and you lose, like, I know I made mistakes in the tournament. Like, do I think that it's so arrogant to me to say that, I lost because of luck when, you've got 3 decks that you had to bring to the tournament? Were they the perfect 3 decks? Were they the perfect builds of those 3 decks? Did you then play all 3 games of your matchups perfectly? Did you select the right deck to ban? Did you select the right deck to play each time? And play, like, the amount of decisions that you have to make that you're just ignoring when you say that you got unlucky is just ridiculous. And yeah, the analysis that Dr. Law did sort of showed that I think around the top 50, for the top 50 players in the world, basically, the shift to 9-1 to 9 rounds is better for them, and they're going to make the top cut more often. And for everyone else, it's like worse or the same. And so I don't really get what advantage we're getting for the extra 4 rounds that we're now having to play.
Yeah, agreed. I think, honestly, a better solution would just be, people want to qualify for the tournament, they want to play in the tournament, and I guess this solution means you play in the tournament for longer. But at the same time, I can't imagine. So I started 3-0 in the tournament. I lost round 4, eliminating me from contention. And at that point, I sort of thought to myself, wow, if there were 5 rounds left to go and I had to play them out, and I would still have to go 5-0 from this point to qualify.
Yeah, that's what I don't think people understand, is that, getting eliminated sucks. What sucks more to me is like losing round. I lost round 1 on the seasonal, and that sucked. I didn't feel good. But what sucks even more is having to play out the next 8 rounds, knowing that any loss knocks you out, and knowing that if I then lose, if I go 5-0 and then lose the next round, that feels even worse. Like, like playing in 9-round tournaments, you're still gonna feel bad if you're not one of the 32 people that qualify. You're gonna feel bad. And that hasn't changed from the 5-0 format. There's only 32 people that qualified. Everyone else is going to have a bad time, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I guess that's something that you have to accept as well. Just like mathematically, these sort of card game tournaments tend to, make losers. They don't make winners. Like,
yeah, and it's just about trying to enjoy the tournament and have fun. And I enjoyed the tournament, had fun. I'm looking forward to the next one, except it sucks that it's going to take a lot longer, but that's fine. I didn't really want to bring it up because I know that people in the comments people have strong opinions on this. So I just want to say that, if you're happy that it's going to the 9 rounds and you've got your reasons that you justify, then that's fine. I'm happy for you. I'm glad that you're enjoying it. But I would have preferred to stay to 5-0, but oh well.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. 9 rounds, it's going to be fun, but I feel like the solution that I would have preferred would have been, 5-round tournaments, but we have more of them, because I feel like once you can start taking more shots, and it's not once every 2 months you get a shot, losing, in your 5 rounds doesn't feel quite as bad.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, I think most people's complaints about this tournament is just they want other tournaments as well. Like, I thought the tournament was basically perfect as it was, and if they had other, like, the thing is, like, people are like, oh, we want the best players to do well, and we want to see who the best players are and stuff. It's like $10,000 for first. Like, you need to have a higher stakes tournament if you really want to encourage the highest highs of all of the best competition. Like, you're just never going to get it's just not high enough stakes for people to care enough about it, and for, like, it to build, the Twitch viewership that it needs as well, all that sort of stuff. Like, if you want to foster a pro scene, then this isn't the tournament that really, this is part of that conversation, but it's not the be all and end all of finding the best players, rewarding the best players financially for their time and effort, and showing that on a big stage. You need different sorts of tournament to what the seasonal should be trying to be. And I understand that people want all that stuff, all the stuff that other card games and esports have. And I think the seasonal has sort of gotten some misguided hate and shots because that other stuff doesn't exist, and so people want the seasonal to take that role. When I think that other tournaments and stuff should exist to fill that void.
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, I love the seasonal. I think Riot are doing a great job. And as easy as it is for me to say, I wish they ran more of these tournaments. They have a budget. They're sinking a lot of money into these things. They're doing coverage for them as well. So they're spending their resources, I think, pretty efficiently. But I can't wait for there to be some more tournaments to play in as well.
Yeah, 100%. And like you've mentioned, paid entry tournaments are things that would be interesting as well. But it's difficult as soon as you get to an open entry tournament as opposed to capping it. It becomes quite a different beast. But I'd like to see open entry tournaments. I'd like to see more elite tournaments with a stricter criteria to qualify it than we currently see in the seasonal, and everything in between. But it's just about the success of the card game, and hopefully we keep seeing that grow. I would also just like to give a huge shout out to Beans for Brains, who is one of our loyal listeners and members of the Discord that qualified, went 5-0 in the seasonal, which is just really, really fun to see. And they had a lineup of Fiora, Pirates, and what was their third? Oh, Freljord Overwhelm. And we've been chatting a bit this week on the Discord, and I think they've convinced that Fiora was sort of an odd deck out in their lineup, and so they're looking for a different one. So if you've got a good suggestion for what would go in that spot, feel free to hop into the Discord and let Beans for Brains know your thoughts. I still think Nightfall Aggro is probably the one that I think, of the decks they've suggested, that I think sort of goes well.
Yeah, it's tough. Especially, there are so many decks, and personally I haven't really played Nightfall Aggro that much. So, but definitely hop into the Discord and have a bit of a chat. There's been a lot of chatter in there recently, so big shout out to everyone who's joined recently. It's been great having you as well.
Yeah, it's been really fun having discussions, particularly with the spoilers coming out and talking about the lineups and seasonal. It's been a lot of fun. So hopefully that continues on. All right. Was there anything else we want to discuss before we got buried into spoilers?
Yeah. So there's one last thing which I want to discuss, which is
you ruined this segue.
I have ruined the segue, but you knew this was coming. We have to talk about my friend Ivan, who qualified for the seasonal. He's an excellent Magic the Gathering player, and he's been dipping his toes into Legends of Runeterra.
What's his the pinnacle of his competitive ELO ranking in Runeterra?
So I think his highest rank was Silver 2, which
an illustrious height.
Yeah, it's pretty high. It's pretty high. So he qualified for the seasonal through the Last Chance Gauntlet, which was impressive. Good on him. He's a great player, so I wasn't too surprised.
How many Prime Glories did he have?
I think he had, maybe 4? I think he had 3 or 4.
Okay.
Yeah, he had a solid number of glories. He's been working at it. But he qualified. He sent me a message saying he'd qualified. We had a bit of a chat about some decks that he could play, and then he ended up going 4-1 in the tournament.
And he lost the 4th round as well, yeah.
Yeah, he did lose the 4th round. But then, I just think that's absolutely unreal that someone can come in, they can have this experience from another card game, and they can just, they just haven't played that many reps of the game, but they get a chance to play in this sort of, high-stakes tournament, and he did a great job. He almost qualified. Some of the messages I got from him were just amazing. He was just like, so look, I've qualified for this tournament. I haven't played against TF Aphelios and Nivea, Overwhelm, and he just kept listing all of these tier 1 meta decks. I was like, all right, we'll see how this tourney goes. We'll try to get you up to speed. But he just did a great job, and I think that's just a real, success story for this game and the model that Riot set up. That sort of anyone can come, and if they're a good player, you don't have to grind a bunch. You don't have to, make it to High Masters. If you're just good at card games and you've got the skills, you can be rewarded for it.
Yeah, for sure. It's so good to see. What was his lineup again?
So I think he ended up playing Fiora, Pirates, and TF Fizz.
Yeah, very good, very good.
Yeah.
Wait, could Beans run TF Fizz in their last deck? I'm trying to remember what.
Yeah, I think they're already playing it. But yeah, we'll have to have a chat to them.
No, they've got Pirates and Freljord Overwhelm. So they could do TF Fizz.
Yeah, I guess so.
That's got to be what you do, right? That's...
Don't know. We probably shouldn't fully leak their lineup. All the other top 32 competitors listening eagerly, yeah. Yeah, if anyone else, if you've top 32, you can't join the Discord this week. Sorry, we're all in on Beans for Brains.
Yeah.
But next week, come back.
Also, any other listeners that qualified, fantastic work and best of luck in the day two in a couple of days. It'll be very exciting to see who does well.
Yeah, sounds good. Should we jump into spoilers?
Let's do it. Let's go. I said buried to set up the buried sun disc pun, but that's fine. That's fine.
No, it was good.
This is sort of a defining card of the new expansion. It's Buried Sun Disc. It's a 1-mana landmark, and what card games often do, because RNG and drawing cards is such an integral part of card games, they always flirt with the idea of consistency, and this is one of Runeterra's sort of first endeavors into doing that. And so you always start the game with a Buried Sun Disc in your hand if all of your cards are Shuriman from the Shurima region. Shuriman. And so, 1-mana landmark. It's got Countdown 25. Countdown is a new mechanic. How does Countdown work, Simon?
So Countdown is basically each turn, your I think they're usually landmarks, will count down, which means they'll start at a number, and each turn that number will go down by 1. And then once you hit 0, a special effect happens.
So they at the end of turn they trigger, or?
I think it's end of turn, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm going to look that up while you're talking, because I think it's start of turn. But
okay,
we'll get clarification on that. So it's got Countdown 25. So after 25 turns, you restore the Sun Disc. Yeah. And also it's got when an Ascended ally levels up, advance at 10 rounds. And so basically a bunch of the new champions in the new set have the Ascended key tag. And so when you level up one of those champions, then you get a big chunk of the Buried Sun Disc leveled up as well. And then, when it finishes counting down, you get an effect where you immediately draw one of all of your Ascendants. So there's 4, I think, Ascended champions. Maybe we've seen 2 of them so far?
I think we've seen 2. I think there are going to be 3.
Okay. So you can draw potentially 3 champions, and for the rest of the game, you're level 2 Ascendants or level 3. So all previous champions have level 1 and level 2, and now in the new Shurima region, they're introducing level 3 champions. What are your thoughts on the Buried Sun? I suppose it doesn't really do much in isolation. Maybe we just want to move on and talk about some of the other cards more to get more...
Oh, I think it is an interesting one to talk about, because, like you've said, this is the first time that we've got level 3 champions in the game, and the Buried Sun Disc is the only way to get your champion to level 3. So I think Riot are trying to do something interesting here with the Ascended cards. So they want you to, build a deck that has all of the Ascended cards. They also want you to have a deck that only has the Shurima cards. And part of the
I do like that it's not quite that parasitic, and you can run it without having all Shurima cards, but it just means that you don't draw it in your opening hand every game. So I like that it's still quite a parasitic mechanic is for those that aren't aware, is a common thing in card games where it specifically refers to a specific subset of cards, and so effectively it only interacts with a specific subset of cards, as opposed to cards that interact with damage champions or things that occur naturally in the card game, or evergreen mechanics that are in a lot of sets, a lot of cards. Parasitic mechanics are things like, you won't have necessarily Ascended cards in every set going forwards. So that's just what we mean by that term.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. But I think you are heavily incentivized to want to be, mono Shurima if you are going to run the Buried Sun Disc. Part of the reason why is you really, really want this card on turn 1 to get the countdown happening. You also really don't want to run 3 copies of this card in your deck, because each additional copy is really, really bad, and it's just a horrendous late game draw later on. So, I feel like you could probably run these champions for their level 1 and 2 form, but I'd be interested to see if anybody does try to run the Buried Sun Disc in a list that isn't purely Shurima cards.
Yeah, I would say just from first glance, and also just from playing a lot of card games and having thought about cards a lot, I would imagine that the Ascended Champions are balanced in such a way that the first 2 levels could essentially be released as a standalone champion, and then the third one you're really getting that power spike when you play the Buried Sun Disc. And so I don't know if I've explained that quite well, but yeah, so the first 2 levels are sort of standalone. You can play them and they're good, and then you're getting that payoff from the fact that you've included the Sun Disc in your deck, and you've only included Shurima cards, and you've jumped through these hoops to get to the third level.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, so far we've seen 2 of the Ascended Champions. We've seen Renekton and Nasus, who we'll get to later on. And I think Azir is going to be the third and final Ascended Champion.
Yeah, well, at this stage, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's an interesting card. Like playing a 1 mana do nothing on turn 1 depends on the meta. The more aggressive the meta is, the worse that is for you. So we'll see how important that is. Also, obviously, the better that in landmark removal gets, the more common people are doing that, then the worse this is. And that's sort of also a nice thing where they've got the safety valves, right? Like if Buried Sun Disc is just absolutely bonkers, there's enough removal now for it that you can just start playing more landmark removal, and then the deck gets inherently worse, and then people stop playing landmark removal, and you get to have those interesting metas, as opposed to just if it was just a land type, if it was a card type that you couldn't interact with.
Yeah, definitely. And it looks like they're letting you sort of build around this effect quite a bit as well. So there's Esteemed Hierophant, which is a 3 mana 3/4, and when it's summoned, you get to advance your Buried Sun Disc by 2 rounds. So that will, let you speed up your Buried Sun Disc. There's also Ascended's Rise, which is a slow speed spell that costs 7 mana, and you get to level up all level 1 Ascended allies. So that's going to level up your champions to level 2. We think that is quite a unique effect. So this might just let you just power up and have your level 3 champions well ahead of schedule outside any other sort of requirements.
Yeah, and I think that's, the fact that this deck builds itself, right? Like you've got the landmark that says you've got to be only running Shurima. You've got the cards that work with the landmark, or the parasitic mechanic stuff. These sort of decks, typically, you don't have that many options for slots normally. Like we're seeing in the spoiler all of the options you have if you want to be full Shurima. And so my initial feel is that this deck will probably be pretty okay. Pretty good. It's very unlikely, I think, that this deck is busted, right? I would be surprised if they had to nerf this deck, because how you build it is just, it's not like people are just going to put something together that they haven't thought, that Riot hasn't thought about. And so I would say that this deck's probably at a pretty reasonable power level, and that it's probably a reasonable place to start if you just want to play all the new cards. I'd say, yeah, put together this deck and you'll probably be having some good fun.
Yeah, for sure. Especially, it's hard to know how strong this deck is going to be as well, because I think Azir is going to be a key piece. And the fact that we haven't seen Azir or any of the cards that go with that third Ascended Champion means there might be some missing pieces about. An interesting thing to note on this deck build as well is that because you get to draw 1 of each Ascended Champion, and because you want to have access to the level 3 Ascended Champion, you might be better off running a split of 2 Renektons, 2 Nasus, 2 Azir, so that you can more reliably have access to them and have access to their, level 3 form when you've put so much work into getting to it.
Yep. So just talk a bit more about those cards. A 3-mana 3/4, I think, is going to be a very solid part of this deck, because that's just a really solid body, and it has an effect on your Sun Disc, gives you something to do early. Like a 3-mana 3/4, that's a really good stat line. I think that's quite a good card.
Yeah, it's not bad.
And then the Ascended Rise that you mentioned, the leveling up, or your level 1 Ascended allies, is pretty interesting. That feels like it might be too expensive.
Yeah, it might not be good enough. Yeah. It's a unique effect, though, so it's definitely something that, once you play with it a couple of times, you'll get a much better sense for it.
Yeah, it's interesting in that, like, your deck probably already wants to be leveling your champions, and so if you level your champions, then cast this, you're getting less value out of this spell, and so you want to cast it before you've leveled your champions, but it costs 7 mana, which is really expensive to use. Actually, not just early in the game, but any point in the game. So, I don't know. Yeah, this one feels like it might be a bit too expensive for me.
Yeah, I guess I could see it having some utility if, for instance, you know, we already know NASA's level up mechanic and Renekton's level up mechanic, and if you just don't want to build around those at all while still having access to the level 3 champions and trying to turbo them out, then this might be, I suppose, a necessary evil. But it's got all of those same risks of Buried Sundisk, except you don't get it in your, you know, your opening hand or, you know, turn 5 when you would want it, which is once you've cast one copy of Ascended's Rise, the rest of them don't do anything. And that's a massive risk on an already, you know, iffy card.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I'm liking some of the things you're saying. Like, I can imagine, like, Nasus, which we'll go to later, is it's a real build-around card, and leveling it's quite difficult. So I can imagine, like you said, having, let's say you have 3 Renekton, 2 Azir, and just 1 Nasus. So you're not a Nasus deck, but you're planning on leveling the Sundisk and drawing Nasus at some point. And so this Ascended Rise means without doing anything to level Nasus, you can play that, get Nasus to level 2, which is pretty good, and then flip the Sun, which, if you're not trying to do anything, it's actually bad, but we'll get to that. And then if you flip the Sundisk, Nasus gets really strong, and you haven't had to jump through any of those hoops that Nasus has, and you've leveled up all of your champions. So that's an interesting thing, but I think, like you said, I think it's just a bit too expensive and clunky. Yeah,
for sure. It seems like the kind of thing that you can build and that will be playable, but not something that's going to be tier 1. So maybe something like a Targon's Peak deck that when it's humming on all cylinders,
yeah,
it's doing something really powerful, but most of the time it's just too clunky to work.
A card that definitely isn't too clunky to work and definitely will see a heap of play is Quicksand. 3 mana, burst spell, give an enemy -4/-0 and disable its keywords, excluding negative keywords for this round. So it's a new twist on Hush, on Purify, on Troll Chant and those sort of spells. It's got a lot going on, this card. It's got a lot going on. I think it's very good.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's really strong. I think it's almost like a sort of fixed Hush. You can't just fully turn off a champion, but you can turn off its keywords. You can get rid of some of its power. I think in a vacuum, this is going to be, you know, worse than Hush by quite a bit, but,
yeah,
you know,
it also
Hush
can't hit your own units.
An insane card. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, if they had a 10/10 and you shrink it down into a 1/1, you know, a They Who Endure or whatever, Quicksand is going to be a lot worse in that spot, but yeah, Quicksand is also going to sometimes let you win combats where a Hush wouldn't. So there are pros and cons, but yeah.
Yeah, I do think it's a card that on day one, I would say that people playing against Quicksand will get a lot of free wins because I think people are going to cast this card and it's not going to do what they expect it to do because they're going to expect it to Hush. But that'll be a mistake that people make once and then they'll figure it out.
Yeah, for sure. Next up, we have Unworthy, which is a 2 mana slow speed spell. It says, give an enemy follower -4/-0 this round. But if you have fewer mana gems than your opponent, kill it instead. So obviously in the game right now, you always have the same amount of mana gems as your opponent unless they've played a ramp spell. So that second effect wouldn't be that, you know, common or useful. But there is actually a sub-theme in this set where you can either sacrifice a unit or destroy one of your mana crystals to get a special effect. And then Unworthy is sort of the payoff if you do end up doing that, which is this 2 mana slow speed kill spell that gets rid of anything.
Yeah, which is obviously very powerful. And I guess it's worth noting that the front half of this card, the give an enemy follower -4/-0 is
terrible.
Well, it's nice again, and this comes back to the Sundisk as well, where I really like pointing out just there's just little things that Riot does when designing cards that I really, really like. You know, a lot of card games when they did this wouldn't have the enemy follower -4/-0. It would just be if you have fewer mana gems than your opponent, kill it instead. And that doesn't change the card really at all because you're only going to be playing. This is only going to be good, and you're only going to be playing it if the ways to remove your mana gems are good, and your deck's utilizing those well, and that makes this a really efficient removal spell. You're not going to be entertaining this card outside of those situations, unless there's such a ramp-heavy meta that it becomes good. But that meta would sort itself out where the ramp players played around this, and it wasn't good anyway. So that's the only situation to play this. And so the -4, -0 doesn't really matter, but it's just in games where you are playing it and you haven't drawn your mana gems, your ways to destroy your mana gems, it just gives you an option to actually use this card, so it's not a dead card. And I think that's just brilliant card design, and I really, really like that aspect of the card. And of basically all the cards that Riot does is they're not really dead. And the little areas that you find that you can use them, they don't come up often, but when you do utilize them well, you feel like a genius, and it's just brilliant.
Yeah, agreed. I think the closest sort of analog that we have in the game for this card already is Shatter out of Freljord, which is the 2-mana slow speed frostbite spell, and if that unit already has 0 power, you get to deal 4 damage to it instead. So unworthy, obviously killing a unit is much, much better than dealing 4 and needing it to, have had 0 power. But I think they have sort of a similar effect, and we'll have to see how good it is to actually sacrifice your mana gems. And if you're not at a significant disadvantage when you do that, then I could see Unworthy being quite a good piece in some decks.
Yeah, the moving pieces here are that, one, the cards that let you sacrifice mana gems have to be very good, and if they are very good, the fact that you're sacrificing mana gems has to be not just absurdly detrimental to you playing out a game against the average deck in the meta. And then if those two things are true, then this card is going to be exceptional, because 2 mana to kill any follower is very, very strong.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's get on to the first of the new champions that we've mentioned a few times. It's Renekton. And gosh, it takes a long time to explain champions. There's just so much going on. It's cost 4. It's a 4/4. It's got Overwhelm. Its level up is it's dealt 12 damage, and its ability is when it challenges an enemy, give it +2/+1 this round. And so it doesn't have challenge itself, but you can obviously give it challenge with Demacia cards. You can also give your opponent's creatures vulnerable, which counts as challenging it, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it does, because there's a bunch of Shurima cards that let you give your opponent's creatures vulnerable, and so they synergize with Renekton to let you challenge an enemy, and then because if you challenge twice, then that levels up because you've hit for 12 damage. Oh, and then when it levels up, it's a 5/5, and it's got attack, give me +3/+3. It still has Overwhelm, so it just gets in there for 8. And then if you've restored the Sun Disc, then Renekton is a 10/10, and with when I block or attack, deal 2 damage to all enemies and the enemy nexus.
And and it still has Overwhelm as well, so it's basically this insane threat if you can get it up to level 3. Honestly, I kind of like each level of Renekton. I think level 1 Renekton is pretty strong. A 4/4 Overwhelm is pretty reasonable by itself if you can challenge anything. Having a 6/5 for 4 with Overwhelm, that's really strong. And obviously, if you can get Renekton to flip, so if you challenge something, you only need 2 attacks. Otherwise, it's going to take 3 attacks for Renekton to flip. But once Renekton is leveled up once, having a 5/5 Overwhelm that attacks as an 8/8 and it only costs you 4 mana, I think that's really, really strong.
Yeah, so I think it'll be interesting to see what Rico Rex, for example, does with Renekton, because Rico Rex loves Overwhelm decks and makes a lot of Overwhelm decks. And that's a natural home for Renekton, in addition to obviously any sort of full Shurima packages. But yeah, it's just a really aggressive, like you said, quite well costed unit that. How do you think it's quite comparable to Shyvana, which is not a big tick for it? So how do you feel about how similar it is to Shyvana, and where do you think Renekton will end up on the playability scales?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to say. I think, so sometimes it can be a lot easier to figure out how playable a new champion is because, you get to see a faction. You get to see, all right, this card, Riven is directly competing with Draven at the 3-drop slot, so that's going to make Riven, worse of an option. So while it is being compared to Shyvana, Shyvana is a champion in Demacia, and this is a whole new region, so we don't know exactly why we're playing this region yet. Maybe there, is some other card in Shurima that we really, really want in another deck, and then we don't want access to, another champion from those factions. Suddenly Renekton is looking incredible, because when we're looking at how good these cards are, really what we're doing is we're comparing them to the other options that could go in the deck instead. And right now, with this brand new faction, we just don't really know, what the best champions are to run, which faction you're going to run it with, and, really just those sort of tuning the deck questions. So I'm not sure exactly where it's going to land, but I think it is really different to Shyvana. I get what you're saying about they have the very similar stat line at that cost, and Shyvana obviously hasn't really landed, but yeah, we'll have to see on Renekton.
No, absolutely fantastic points. And yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's just a comparison I've seen a lot of people making, and it's obviously one that makes sense. But yeah, like you said, it really comes down to how good the region is and how well Renekton synergizes with what the region's trying to do, and with the regions that you pair it with, what they're trying to do. And so if Shurima has a lot of really good support spells, I mean, I think Renekton has really decent base stats, not too difficult to level, and it's also got the Ascended option if you go for the Sun Disc. And so I think it looks pretty solid. Pretty solid card.
Yeah, it looks really cool. Yeah. All right. So another new Shurima card that got some discussion over Twitter this week is...
Yeah.
I included this one because I knew you might want to have a chat about it. Is Bloodthirsty Marauder, which is 1 mana for a 3/1.
Yeah, I would just beg of everyone listening that just when you play card games, new cards come out. That's just what they do. They release new cards, and I would just beg of you to just be at peace with the fact that cards will come out and they will be better than old cards, and that's just a fact of life. Like, how many cards can you make without making a card better than an older card? It's just every single card game ever has done it. And I just please just don't, when a new card comes out, please just don't Google the stat line for mana costs and then start posting about how old cards need to be buffed now because this card is better than them. And it's just painful. It pains my eyes. It hurts me in the soul. And
yeah. And it's kind of like, I was just saying as well that, this is a unit in a completely different faction.
Exactly.
You might end up in a spot where, a faction isn't particularly aggressive. So having this really aggressive tool, which is better than every other, aggressive 1-drop that you could run, but you don't really get any other good support from that region. Suddenly you've introduced some really interesting deck building problems into the game where you might decide, okay, I really want this 1-drop and one other spell. Is it worth me giving up a different faction? And suddenly you've got choices where earlier you might have just slammed 2 regions together because there was no reason not to.
Yeah, exactly. And also just like Riot balances this game basically better than pretty much any other card game I've ever played. And so, yeah, implying that they should be doing stuff like it's just silly. It's fine. We'll move on. So the next card is Penitent. Do you know what Penitent means?
Penitent.
Penitent, of course.
Yeah.
Which is a 1 mana 2/2. So this is a Demacia card. 1 mana 2/2. When it's summoned, if you behold an elite, create a Tattered Banner in hand. Do you know what a Tattered Banner is? You put this one in the cards you wanted to talk about.
Oh, I think you included this one as a card you wanted to talk about, didn't you? Is that... You should really know what Tattered Banner does.
So we're not talking... There's been a lot of cards spoiled. We're not talking about every one. And Simon has personally curated this list of cards that he wants to talk about. I just want to be clear of that.
All right. So I've looked up Tattered Banner for you because he couldn't be bothered doing it. So it's a 1 mana burst spell, which says the next time you summon an ally this round, grant it Challenger. So essentially we've got Penitent Squire, which is a better version of the 1 mana 2/2 Cythria.
They need to buff that Cythria, clearly.
Well, I mean, I guess that Cythria is an elite, and this one isn't.
Up,
so yeah. So
I'm sorry. Is the Tattered Banner a collectible card?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But yeah, essentially, it's a way to give one of your units Challenger. I mean, the Tattered Banner doesn't really matter that much. I guess it's more about just having more of that critical mass of good one-drops in something like an elite deck. So if you did want to play a Bannerman aggro deck where you're forced to just play Demacia cards, having a Penitent Squire to help fill that lineup out and having access to this nice little Tattered Banner as well could be something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've talked a lot about how challenge is just a really strong keyword. It also has advantages with Renekton, which is really good. It is awkward running this card in decks that, because it's not elite, so if you're running an elite deck, you don't necessarily want cards that aren't elite, but it's an interesting 2-drop that it seems quite strong. Like you said, 1 mana 2/2 is a really playable stat line, and it gives you a card that has a tangible effect on the game, so I think it's a pretty good card.
Yeah, definitely not bad.
And I think it's been a while since those sort of decks have been good, so it's good to see Demacia getting some new tools. Another new tool that they're getting, one that we're pretty excited for, is Golden Agus. And it is a slow spell, costs 4 mana, give an ally barrier this round and rally. So it's effectively Relentless Pursuit, but you pay 1 extra mana and to give a card barrier, which is a pretty good rate. I'd say it is much better in decks like Fiora Shen, and we've talked about this a bit ourselves, and that's because, if you're going wide, the more creatures you have, the less relevant this is to giving something barrier is less relevant. If you don't have Challenger, it's less relevant. And a lot of those Demacia decks do just want to go really wide. And so I think you'd rather run Relentless Pursuit so that you can use more of your mana and just get a wider and bigger board, buff that board, and then just get in with all your units. Whereas in Fiora Shen, it's much more about having a few select threats and looking for opportunities to get the pursuit in. And it could end up being that the 1 extra mana is just too much for this card, but giving a Fiora Challenger barrier or a Scorching Dragon barrier and flipping your Shen a bit faster. There's just a lot of nice synergies here, and paying the 1 mana for barrier, I think, is a pretty good rate.
Yeah, agreed. So it's definitely a card where in some metas, it depends on exactly why you're running Relentless Pursuit. So, for example, if you're running Relentless Pursuit because, in Fiora Shen, for instance, you're going to deny their Field Rush and then you want an extra attack step, or your opponent's going to tap out for 1, big spell, which still lets you have good attacks, you get to really punish them by doing that. So if that's happening, you really want Relentless Pursuit because it's 1 mana cheaper, the barrier does nothing for you. But if it's a metagame where, you can't attack, your opponent has a bunch of units as well, so you might only have one or 2 units which have a good attack to begin with, being able to give a unit barrier to get, a much better attack on board does make the card significantly better than Relentless Pursuit.
Yeah, and what I really, really like this for, even if we don't end up running, 1 or 2 copies on ladder, in tournament play, I think it's going to be brilliant because instead of running 2 Relentless Pursuit, I think it'll be much better to run 1 Golden Agus, 1 Relentless Pursuit, just because it gives your opponent an additional thing to have to play around that is essentially the same effect, but there are situations where it can affect your opponent's decision making, and also situations where it can affect you being able to do something a bit more powerful. And so I think it'll be really good. I really like having stuff like this that is a very similar effect to another card, but in those tournament settings, it gives you a real advantage.
Yeah, for sure. One other thing to mention about the card as well, which I'm not sure exactly how the rules are going to work, but keep this in mind. So it says give an ally barrier this round and rally. So I'm not sure exactly if you pick the unit you're going to give barrier to, and if they remove your unit in response, do you still get to rally or not? I'm not 100% sure because the cards that have these double effects aren't always consistent.
It definitely... You'll still rally, so because there's a full stop there, I believe. If you look at Cold Resistance, which is another new card, it's Catalyst essentially. It's 5 mana burst spell in Freljord, get an empty mana gem and grant an ally +0/+2. Because they've got the "and" there in the text instead of a full stop, I would say that for Cold Resistance you have to have a creature out to cast it. Whereas for Golden Agus, it will still resolve and rally even if they kill the unit. But, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty confident.
Yep. All right, great. Well, yeah, obviously, if they can kill your unit and you don't get to rally, then that's quite a significant risk, and then it might not be...
Oh, it's totally unplayable. It's totally unplayable there, right? That's so bad.
Yeah.
So let's talk about J4. So for those of you who played League of Legends, I think you'll agree that how they've integrated J4's kit into
Jarvan
Runeterra,
4, that is, also for people who haven't played.
everyone knows J4. It's incredible. It's just he's got quite a varied and wide kit, and it's just exceptional. It's a nice little tidbit for those that have played League of Legends, how cleanly it's integrated over. So Jarvan, and this is why I've been talking about elites a bit, Jarvan is an elite. He's a 6 mana 5/3 with barrier, and when you attack, pay Jarvan's cost to summon him, challenging the strongest enemy. So you can untap with a board, serve him with some creatures on turn 6, and Jarvan will pay the 6 mana, come in, challenge their strongest unit with barrier as a 5/3, which is really strong. And then its level up is allies have survived 4+ strikes from enemy blockers, and that is one, I believe, that counts even when Jarvan's not in your hand. So that's which is always really good. And then when it's leveled up, you get round start, create a fleeting Cataclysm in hand, and when J4 challenges an enemy, give it barrier. And you haven't included Cataclysm in the list of cards that we're going to talk about. So Cataclysm is a 3 mana slow spell when an ally gets a free attack challenging an enemy. So that's an interesting card as well. So that's a lot to go over. What do you think of J4?
I think it looks pretty interesting. It definitely seems like a pretty strong ability to be able to open attack and, still develop a 5/3 or 6/4 attacker. So I think that's really strong. At the same time, I could see some really awkward spots where you would like to open attack and do something post-combat, and and Jarvan 4 just appears. So definitely keep that in mind when you're playing with the deck, that this isn't a May ability, and if you have 6 mana and you open attack with a Jarvan in your hand, Jarvan will be coming down.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one. I do feel like most of the time that's going to be what you want to do, right?
Yeah.
Like, it feels... Yeah, I think it's very likely that it's going to be a high percentage that you're not going to get burnt much. I think it looks pretty good. It's pretty interesting. Like, a lot of these elite decks, the ability to untap and attack, like you said, and develop a big threat is just huge, and it's not something that that's part of what gives the Overwhelmed deck so much power. Is the Battle Fury, is the ability to effectively untap, open attack, and still develop a big creature by playing Battle Fury is really powerful. And you see it as well in the Mistwraith decks with the 5 mana burst spell that summons a Mistwraith. Being able to develop an attack at burst speed is really strong. And so I think that it'll be interesting to see, like we said, haven't been very strong elite decks for a while, so it'll be interesting to see what sort of shells people play around with, and if Jarvan ends up being strong enough to be included in those. Yeah,
definitely. And I don't think... Obviously, an elite deck is a reasonable home, but you could really run Jarvan in most shells.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I don't know if it goes into the current Demacia decks, like Scouts. I don't know if you'd want to put it in over Quinn, for example. Obviously, Misfortune's just too powerful, and Quinn's also really good. I don't know if it has enough sort of synergy with that deck to fit in. Maybe the bigger Demacia decks, the like Garen, Aurelion Sol ones. Like, Garen's not that good in those decks, so maybe J4 could go in there as a way to challenge, fight some of your opponent's troubling units and wear them down. I could see that being a home, but it'll be an interesting card.
Yeah, I'm going to work on cutting Fiora from Fiora Shen and just adding Jarvan instead. Give that a
heresy.
Yeah. All right, so next up, we're going to talk about some of the new landmarks which are coming out in the set. So I guess we should start by talking about Talia, who is a new champion, which is basically a landmark build-around champion. So Talia is 5 mana for a 2/4, and when you play Talia, you summon an exact copy of an allied landmark, and the level up ability is when you've summoned 5+ landmarks in a game. And then Talia levels up, so she's got the same playability, summon an exact copy of an allied landmark. She's now a 3/5, and she has attack, deal 2 to my blocker. If it's dead or gone, deal 2 to the enemy nexus instead. If you have a landmark, do this 2 more times. So that's, a pretty strong ability. So it definitely comes down to how difficult is it to play 5 or more landmarks. At the moment, given the landmarks that exist in the game, this is an impossible level up condition. And even if you did do it, it would probably be, horrendously bad because you'd have 5 landmarks in play and space for 1 unit, which would, be Talia. But thankfully, they've released a range of new landmarks which can help you to meet this condition. So one of them is called Preservarium. So it's a landmark. It costs 2 mana. When I'm summoned, draw 1. And then it has countdown 2. And then you draw 1 again. So basically, it's 2 mana, draw 2. But there's a 2-turn delay before you get your second card. So, that's a reasonable ability. And if you're trying to find your Talia, flip your Talia, you want landmarks that don't stick around as well. You want them to give you some sort of value and then to vanish so that you get your board space back instead of needing to sit and play all game like something, like the Veiled Temple.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this is such a hard card to analyze because it's just a totally different way to use landmarks than we've previously had, and so it'll be very interesting. I'm super keen to try and play with this card, and Preservarium's an interesting one. That's the sort of effect that in Magic the Gathering would be very, very strong, but drawing cards is a lot less strong in Runeterra because you naturally draw more cards anyway because you draw on every turn cycle, and also like I just feel like there's a lot of ways to draw cards in Runeterra. You don't often go out. I think mana's a bigger glut than cards, I guess, and so I don't really know how powerful drawing 2 is, especially like, I just see me playing this against a discard aggro deck, and they develop 2 more 1-drops, and
you do play against discard aggro a lot.
I feel like, I don't know, this doesn't feel like a card that if it was a no faction card, I don't know if I would have wanted to really have put this in many decks that I've played in Runeterra to date.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. So it's something that if you just played this card by itself with no other synergy, it might not necessarily be that strong. There are some spots where it obviously could be pretty good. But, if you have something like a Talia, so you play a Preservarium, you draw a card, next turn you play Talia, the Preservarium comes back again, you draw another card, the following turn the first Preservarium dies, you draw a card, then the next turn that happens again. So at this point, you've played 2 landmarks for Talia.
You haven't done anything.
So it's like...
You haven't done anything.
What was that?
You haven't done anything, though. Your opponent's just destroying you.
Well, you've played a 2/4 champion, which could be a threat later on. Like, you've spent 7 mana. Like, it's not...
Yeah.
I get what you're saying, but if this is one synergy that you have access to, then... having access to that tool when you need cards is going to be really strong.
Yeah.
So another card which I think could be really interesting with Talia is Ancient Hourglass. So it's 2 mana for a fast spell, and you obliterate an ally and summon a Stasis statue in its place. And basically, Stasis statue is a landmark, and it has countdown 1. So, after 1 turn, it's going to vanish, and when it vanishes, you get that exact unit back into play. So this is a way for you to protect your units and have them come back immediately. So it's better than something like a recall effect, because with a recall effect, you'd have to spend, the full mana on that card again to get it back into play. Whereas with Ancient Hourglass, you just get to have it come back into play. You get any of your summon abilities again. And something that I think is going to work with Talia, which seems really cool, is, you can wait until turn 5. You can have 2 spell mana banked. You can play Ancient Hourglass on one of your other units. Then Talia is going to come into play, going to copy that landmark, and then you might end up with 2 copies of that unit. So that could be a really strong way to turn Talia's ability from copy a landmark to copy a unit, which, could be really strong. For instance, you could even do this to Talia. So you could play 1 Talia, copy a landmark. Later on, you turn this Talia into a stone, and then play another Talia, copying it. suddenly you have 3 Talias in play, and when they're flipped, that's going to be, absolutely ridiculous. So just having access to that play later on, even if it's not the main way that you're using Hourglass, could make that combination quite powerful.
Yeah, this is the first card, and maybe the only one I've seen so far that really stopped me in my tracks and maybe go, this card is strong. This is an incredibly strong effect, and that's without even getting into the powerful synergies with Talia, like you said, and with copying landmarks. It does obviously, similar to the Buried Sun disc, it does open you up to, if landmark removal is really strong, then they'll be able to do that. But I mean, that's still sort of 1-for-1. But just, being able to counter your opponent's removal and combat tricks. If they use a combat trick, you can Ancient Hourglass your creature to take out of battle just to protect your creatures, to re-get any summon effects, to copy a creature with Twilight. There's just so much going on with this card, and it is aggressively costed as well. Like 2 mana is very cheap for this effect. It just seems absurd, this card. I'm very excited to play with it.
Yeah, it will definitely be an interesting one.
All right. Let's go on to Unraveled Earth. This is a 3 mana burst spell from Shurima, and it summons 2 Roiling Sands. You've just set me up. Oh no, you've got Roiling Sands here. Fantastic. So Roiling Sands then is a 2 mana, and you can start to see how Talia makes sense in this world that in the set that I've created. Roiling Sands is a 2 mana landmark. When an enemy is summoned, destroy me to grant it vulnerable. And I believe that Roiling Sands isn't a collectible card because it doesn't have a rarity symbol. So you pay 3 mana at burst speed for Unraveled Earth, and then you get 2 of these landmarks, and when your opponent next summons a unit, you give it vulnerable and you lose your landmark. So you get, for 3 mana, you get 2 triggers on Talia's 5 landmarks, and you get to give your opponent's next 2 creatures that they play vulnerable. Yep, and you draw 1.
Yeah, draw a card as well. And then another way to get Roiling Sands, there is a 2 mana 3/1 called Rockhopper, and when it's summoned, you summon a Roiling Sands. So this is definitely another way that Talia can, flip earlier in a game and reliably.
Yeah, I really like these sort of cards, like Rockhopper, that are just aggressively costed creatures that have an interesting effect on the game. And then that's not even without looking at the fact that the landmarks have synergy with Talia and with other cards. So I think that's a pretty cool card. It's unfortunate when I look at something like this that compared to a game like Magic the Gathering, where you can respond to your opponent casting a creature, you can't, if your opponent, you can't do that in Runeterra. You can't, your opponent casts a creature and then you, in response, play Unraveled Earth to give it vulnerable. So your opponent does have full control over which creatures they give vulnerable, but sometimes, they won't have great options, and so you may be able to force them into it. I think it'll be really interesting how this plays out. It's a bit of it's a funky one, right?
Oh yeah, for sure, super funky. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked about Talia. I think Talia looks pretty sweet. I think there'll be. I'd be surprised if there's just not enough support for her. So I think there will be enough support, and I think she'll be an interesting one. Also, not just all the Shurima cards, but you can potentially pair her with other regions which have powerful landmarks, and that'll be interesting as well. And I think she looks like a pretty sweet card. Yeah,
for sure. Agreed. All right.
You go.
Yeah, next up we've got Three Sisters. So this is a Freljord card. It's 1 mana for a burst spell, and you can create a fleeting Flash Freeze, Fury of the North, or Entomb in hand. So I'm going to read what Entomb does, because that's also a new card. So Entomb is 5 mana for a fast speed spell. Obliterate a unit and summon a Frozen Tomb in its place. Frozen Tomb is a landmark. It costs 0. It has countdown 2. Summon an exact copy of the obliterated unit are replaced. So I think Three Sisters is a really strong card just because it gives you that versatility. You can get a Flash Freeze or a Fury of the North, and I'm assuming Entomb is one that you're not going to use that often. So sort of all of these cards protect your units. So Flash Freeze reduces their power. Fury of the North lets you, win a combat that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to with Flash Freeze. And then Entomb, you can protect a unit from removal, seems the most likely, or remove a huge unit that would perhaps serve as a blocker later on in the game.
Yeah, so the flexibility here is really good, and the question will come down to, is the 1 mana worth paying for that flexibility? Flash Freeze is obviously already a playable card in its own right, and Fury of the North is very close to being a card that's played, and Entomb, I think, is probably also not going to be played in its own right, but just the versatility of getting all those options is really strong, and so... Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I think this is another one that is just I think this is a fantastic tournament lineup card, because, having to play around Flash Freeze, Fury of the North, and Entomb is very difficult. And so, I think it'll be a fantastic one to include in your Freljord creature-based decks.
Yeah, agreed. Next up, we've got a landmark. It's called Blighted Ravine. This is also in Freljord. It's 4 mana. When I'm summoned, heal your Nexus 4. And then it has Countdown 1, deal 2 to everything. So basically, this is a landmark avalanche in a way. It's dealing 2 to all units. It's also dealing 2 damage to your opponent's face and to your face. So while the card heals you 4, it's really only netting you 2 life.
Oh, I don't know if I mentioned before, but Countdown is at the start of your turn.
Okay, yeah, great.
Yeah. Which is quite relevant for this card. So the play pattern for this card is you play it, gain 4, and then once you pass this turn to your opponent, and the turn cycle ends, and you go to your opponent, or the next turn. Yeah, it's not really opponent's turn. You go to the next turn, then this deals 2 damage to everything, as opposed to being at the end of the turn.
But isn't that identical though?
That does sound very similar.
Like that's like you said, it's very important, but I'm not sure how. I'm not sure why.
Maybe not quite as important as was previously stated.
Yeah.
I think this card's pretty sweet. Like I like Avalanche a lot, and this is an Avalanche that heals you for 4.
Yes and no. It heals you for 2. I'm just going to keep referring to it as healing you for 2.
Oh, okay. It does 2 to every. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So it heals you for 2, but also they get to attack that turn with the units still, whereas if you avalanched...
Yeah.
Because obviously you only play this card when your opponent has a board of units, right? You're not going to...
You only put in your deck if, you're not like a creature-based deck.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, they need to like have the attack token as well, because otherwise they're just not going to develop into it. They'll just wait till next turn and you've wasted a card sort of thing. So
I feel like not being a spell, like not utilizing spell
mana. Yeah, not using spell mana as well. So
this card might suck.
Yeah. It's definitely the first time you look at it and you're like, wow, I gained 4 life? And you're like, wow, they can't develop for the rest of the turn? And then you think about it a little more and you're like, wait, if I avalanche...
Why does it deal 2 to you? That just seems so odd.
Yeah, I mean, it deals 2 to them as well. So, I don't know. It's definitely one of those...
especially, imagine scenarios where, you haven't taken damage yet, and so you, don't even heal 4, you just take 2.
But honestly, in those spots, you're probably not playing a board sweeper necessarily.
I mean, let's say your opponent has Twisted Fate out, and, it's turn 4, they don't have the attack token.
True.
They play Twisted Fate. That's
I've
killed a lot of Twisted Fate with Avalanche.
Oh yeah.
And so,
agreed. So it's definitely, I don't know, it's an interesting card, and there might be some other uses for it. The fact that it's a landmark
I don't know.
Kind of interesting, but
I'm off it. I'm so off this card.
But if
it was in a different faction to Freljord, maybe there's a meta where you just need more avalanches, but I don't know. I'm off this card. I think it sucks.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go on to... Maybe we should talk about Lissandra before this card. Let's talk about Lissandra. So Lissandra is 3 mana, champion, 2/3, Freljord. It's got tough. When it's summoned, summon a Frozen Thrall, which... Oh, God.
I'll read it. I've got it here. So Frozen Thrall is 1 mana for a landmark. It has countdown 8, summon a Frostguard Thrall. And then Frostguard Thrall is an 8 mana 8/8, which has Overwhelm.
Yep. So 8 turns later you get an 8/8, and when Lissandra levels up when you have summoned 2+ allies that cost 8+, And then when Lissandra levels up, you create a Watcher. And so just also, God, the champions just have so much going on.
Yeah.
So when Lissandra's leveled up, she's a 3/4. She's still got tough. And she's got round. When you summon her, you still get a Frozen Thrall. At round start, you create a fleeting 0-cost Ice Shard. Is Ice Shard the deal 1 to everything?
Yeah, so it's 3 mana fast spell, deal 1 to everything.
Yeah, and then the Watcher that we talked about before is a 17 mana, 11/17 that costs 0 if you have summoned 4+ allies that cost 8+ this game. So you've got to summon 2 to level up Lissandra, and then if you summon 4, then the Watcher is 0, and it has attack, obliterate the enemy deck.
Which is basically win on the spot, because your opponent's not going to get another attack step.
Yep, so... And you can obviously do sneaky things to cheat the Watcher out with Raw to make it cost 0, or Spectral Matron to put it into play, so there's some funky things you can do to get around the fact that it costs 17 mana. Lissandra's got a lot going on.
Yeah, she seems really strong to me. Even just on, pure stats, a 3 mana 2/3 with tough, that's basically a 2/4 but better, because you get that extra point of toughness, but for each, point of damage you're taking. Frozen Thrall seems, reasonably good as well. I don't know, giving your Nexus tough seems decent.
Oh, that's right. When Lissandra levels up, your Nexus gets tough, which is also really strong.
Yeah, so it's definitely one of those cards where... And then it's got this, win the game spell built in with the Watcher. And I don't know, I feel like you don't even have to go all in on the Watcher. You don't necessarily have to build your deck around, I've got a Watcher as soon as possible. You can just sort of have this built-in inevitability in Lissandra, which if games go really long and you've got this, 2/4 in play, which is helping you stall the game so that you get your free 8/8, then, you can build your deck to just have a game go long. You don't have to turbo out the Watcher as quickly as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what's one of the things that's really interesting with Lissandra is that another new card, Draklorn Inquisitor, which is a 5 mana 4/5, and when it's summoned, you also summon a Frozen Thrall, and then at the round end, if the countdown of any of your Frozen Thralls is 4 or less, advance them all to 0. And so there's some really good play patterns there where you can play Lissandra, and 4 or 5 turns later, play this 5-drop, and then suddenly you've got, at the end of turn, you've got 2 8/8s.
Just to clarify, I think it's only the ones that are 4 or less advance to 0.
If any of your Frozen Thralls is 4 or less, advance
them to 0. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's worded a bit confusingly. All right, but still, I think there's synergy there, because then if you advance 2 of them, that levels up Lissandra, and so yeah, I don't know. Like you said, I think there's varying levels of deepness you can go in on Lissandra, but even just in sort of average control-ish Freljord-based decks, I think it's quite a strong piece.
Yeah, she seems really cool. She definitely seems like an interesting piece, and who knows, she might slot into some existing decks, or you might play her with something else. So Trundle is obviously another card that cares about having 8-cost cards, and it makes an 8-cost unit. Something to note about the Watcher and Lissandra as well is that it only works with 8+ cost units. So you can't, play Faces of the Old Gods, your 8 mana double ramp spell, and have that count as one of the cards. It has to be a unit, but it can be summoned, so it doesn't have to be played. So you could do something like play, the Chronicler of Ruin, the 4 mana 3/3 that you kill a unit and summon it again. And I think that would count as an extra stack on Lissandra or the Watcher.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting, like, when the set comes out, the Watcher's such a splashy, fun effect that people are going to gravitate towards trying to turbo that out as much as possible. And from people playing those decks, we'll sort of see how good Lissandra is herself. And then from that, maybe, we'll see Lissandra decks develop that are less based around turboing out the Watcher and more just the fact that she's a really efficient unit.
Yeah, agreed.
So the next card we have to talk about is another Shurima card. It's Spirit Fire. It is a 7 mana burst spell that gives enemies -2/-0, and at round end deal 2 damage to me. What do you think about this one? That's a big effect, but it's very expensive.
Yeah, so it's expensive, but it's also a burst spell. So I think it's kind of cool that it'll, save you a bunch of life on a key turn, and then deal with a lot of the opposing units potentially. So definitely just a card to keep your eye on, and definitely one to be aware of, particularly when you're trying to figure out when you should open attack against Shurima.
Yeah. I feel like this is maybe another sort of spicy one-off to have in your decks to force your opponent to play around, and also sometimes it's just going to be a gigantic effect. I would be surprised if this was something you were just running like 3 copies of in your decks, just because a 7 mana burst spell that doesn't do anything against like big creatures is. But in certain metas where people are playing heaps of spiders decks, heaps of aggro decks, this is
but then 7 mana isn't great against those decks. But it is one of those cards.
Turn 4.
That's true, but if you do literally nothing until turn 4 and then do this,
you can play 1-drop, 2-drop, nothing on 3, this on 4.
Well, one thing to keep in mind with this as well is that Nasus, this is a Shurima card, and Nasus wants you to kill other units, so we'll get to Nasus maybe straight after this card, but there aren't really that many ways to do that in Shurima, but this card can sort of fill that role for you, so it might be interesting as a tool in those decks as well.
Yeah. All right, the next card we're going to talk about is Rampaging Buckeye. It's a 5 mana 4/6 from Shurima. It's got Overwhelm, a lot of Overwhelm going on in Shurima. It's got play if you have slain 4+ units this game, an enemy and I strike each other, which is a very powerful into the battlefield play effect. And so slain is, I couldn't find the definition of slain. It's basically if you use a spell to kill an enemy unit or an allied unit, or then if that counts as slain, or if you do combat, if one of your creatures trades with one of your enemy creatures, that counts as slain as well. But it doesn't count your creatures dying in combat. It doesn't count ephemeral.
So my understanding of it is, if an effect that one of your cards has kills a unit, it can be your unit or an opposing unit, then you get a slain stack. So, think of it this way. If your unit trades for your opponent's unit has died because your unit dealt damage to it, and your unit has died because your opponent's unit has dealt damage to it.
Yeah.
And then, if, for instance, there's a vengeance, then, if you played the vengeance, if you target your unit or the other unit, it doesn't matter. You've still slain that unit. Yeah. So I think that's how the effect works, and a good mental shortcut to figure out, am I going to get a slain stack or not?
Yeah, that makes sense. And just also I'd say it wouldn't work with stuff like Ancient Hourglass, because that obliterates the unit, which gets around death effects, and I'd imagine slain as well.
Yep.
So if you can reliably trigger this card on turn 5, which seems pretty difficult, then it's really good. A 5 mana 4/6 that fights and will kill one of your opponent's creatures, that's really strong, especially when the meta, particularly at the moment, there's a lot of really strong champions. I was just checking that this doesn't only target followers. There's a lot of really strong champions that don't get into combat, have small bodies, and are difficult and awkward to remove. So if you can play this and kill your opponent's Twisted Fate, kill your opponent's Zoe, kill your opponent's Aphelios, kill your opponent's Draven, that's really strong, and you're still left with a 4/3 or something Overwhelm. So yeah, I think this will come down to how easy it is, how reliable you're able to trigger this at around the turn 5 mark of the game. But if you're able to, this seems like a really good card.
For sure. I think this card's still going to be pretty good, turn 7, turn 8, especially on those are sort of the turns when your opponent is threatening to level up their champions as well. So being able to play this and interrupt that can be quite strong there as well.
Yeah, I do think this. The fail case for this card is still pretty good if you don't turn it on till there. But I think you really want, against like the aggressive decks, you're going to want to be playing this on curve. But also that's probably where it's easiest to trigger it. Presuming.
But even then, I mean, even if you're just playing it on curve, you don't necessarily have to kill one of their units. I think at that point, having a 4/6 Overwhelm in a matchup where that's good, or this card isn't necessarily in your deck to beat all matchups, but if it's really, really good in one spot, you can try to make up for that somewhere else in your curve to deal with another matchup as well.
Yeah, for sure. Really, really good card, and excited to see these sort of effects come into Runeterra. All right, Bakai Reaper is a 1-mana 1/2 fearsome with when you slay a unit, grant me +1/+0. So really aggressive card. 1-mana 1/2 fearsome is not that impressive, but then after you slay like one unit, it gets pretty reasonable.
Yeah, I think it doesn't really take that much work, and I think slay just happens in every game. Like
you're always slaying stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, units just trade.
Yeah,
I mean your cards interact with your opponent's cards.
Yeah, every deck, like you're either trading with your opponent's creatures or you're killing their creatures. It's only in matchups where and I guess where this card's going to be awkward is the aggressive decks, which this is going to want to be in an aggressive deck most likely, against a control deck that doesn't run many creatures. And so that is an awkward spot for this to be in.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. So definitely one to just keep an eye on as well. It could also end up being kind of like, if you're playing a really aggressive or like a really all-in Nasus style list with Shadow Isles, and you want something that just naturally gets bigger and kind of turns into a bit of a threat, and there's also another body for you to, glimpse beyond, use those sorts of effects. This is something that you might be able to keep in mind there.
Yeah, probably fulfills a similar role in a lot of decks. Like, when I first look at it, to me, like this is an aggressive card, it wants to go in aggressive decks. But it probably can also fill a similar role to Greenglade Guardian. What's the 1-mana 1/2 that we play in Fiora that I don't love?
Greenglade Caretaker.
Greenglade Caretaker. So that is a 1-drop that, similar to this, it's a 1-drop that gets bigger when you do things that the rest of your deck wants to do. And Fiora not a particularly aggressive deck, but it's good to have a 1-drop that, gets in for a couple of damage early, and then later, as you play out your game, can grow to be a significant threat. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I think this has homes outside of really aggressive decks, and I think this will probably be quite heavily played. I'd imagine. It just seems like the floor for this card is still very high.
Yeah, definitely one to keep an eye on. So let's go to the final champion of today that was actually spoiled today. So we've got Nasus. So 6 mana Ascended. Nasus has Fearsome, and Nasus gets +1/+1 for each unit you've slain this game. So Nasus comes into play as a 2/2. Its level up is when I strike for 10 plus damage. So it's going to come into play. It sees the units you've slain before you play Nasus, so it's probably going to come into play quite large to make that strike for 10 damage and actually a sort of achievable goal. Then once Nasus is leveled up, so it becomes a base 3/3. It has Fearsome, and it now has Spell Shield. Enemies have -1/-0, and it still has the ability that gives it +1/+1 for each unit you've slain this game. And then if you're really living the dream and you have restored the Sun Disk, you get to level Nasus up again. At this point, Nasus becomes a 10/10 with Fearsome and Spell Shield. It still has that +1/+1 ability, and it gives all enemies -3/-0.
Yeah, so Nasus feels... I think people are sort of agreed on this, and it feels a bit slow and clunky, like... Maybe you are just slaying stuff left, right, and center, and it ends up being quite good. But like you said, it just feels like you've got to slay 8 units to get it to be a 10/10, and then when it strikes, it'll level up. So you've got to have slain 8 units before it sort of does the level up thing. And how good is this if you're playing it as a 6 mana 8/8 or 9/9? Like that's pretty good. Is it worth one of your champion slots? I wouldn't be surprised to see Nasus be just like a one-of in the mono Shurima decks, sort of like I talked about before. If you're running the Sun Disk, it's a late game threat that you can run, and you want to tutor it when you crack the Sun Disk, but you don't necessarily want to draw it throughout the game. But yeah, am I going to be running decks with 3 Nasus that look to slay a bunch of stuff and then get in there with the big spell shielded flipped dog? I'm not sure. I struggle to look at a card that has a 6 in the converted mana cost and a 2 and a 2 in the Baron toughness and get excited.
Yeah. It's definitely a card. People have talked about using this as a really big unit to play Atrocity off of, but the fact that you only get Spell Shield after you've already hit for 10 makes me less excited about that being a reliable win condition, but who knows, maybe we could see people go back to, there's a 1 mana spell that you play and your next unit gets a Spell Shield this turn, so play that, then Nasus, and then, Atrocity. Maybe that sort of combo is worthwhile, but
yeah, is that
I don't
better
know.
than just
I'm
playing
not
like
excited.
Celestial units and
look, mate. Look, I'm trying my best here.
I'll definitely probably be trying because I really like Nasus from League of Legends. I really like sub games, and Nasus, like just like in League of Legends, you play a sub game where you're trying to just slay stuff and you don't really care about winning the game. You just want to level up.
Just
Nasus.
got to get more stacks, yeah.
And that's like fun. Like it's a fun card. It looks sweet, and its level up animation is great.
Oh yeah, the level up animations have been great that they've been showing us in recent videos.
Yeah, just another request to the player base. As this game goes on and Riot gets better at doing things are going to get better, and that's good. You want things to get better, but it would be a mistake, in my opinion, for Riot to then, let's say that the new champions or their level up animation is a 10, and maybe some of the old champions, and this isn't true because it's very subjective, but let's say it was objective. Let's say the old champions, their level up animation is a 1, and so some people are saying like, oh, Riot needs to go back and improve the level up animations of all of the old champions. Which just what is the plus side there from Riot and from players, really? Like when new cards come out and they have new animations like that I want to play with the new cards anyway. I want to craft the new cards. People are going to put money into the game to buy the new cards. There's cosmetics that people are going to put money into, but if they went back and made Darius's level up animation better, like I'm not gonna pay money for Darius. Like the Riot's not making money out of that. I don't want to play Darius anymore because its level up animation is different. I just think there's just no upside essentially for it. And also what you're going to get is some people are going to complain that the new animation isn't as good as the old one. I would much rather just see them just bring in skins. And so if you don't like the Darius level up animation, then you can get a skin that gives you a different level up animation. I'd like to see them do that, but I think that going back and putting considerable resources into updating those is just such a huge waste of Riot's time for no upside to them as a company at all, and not really any tangible upside to the community either, considering how much effort it would take for them to do.
Yeah, honestly, I agree with you, and I would also just like to say that I love hearing your rants, and there have been some good ones this episode, and that was particularly on point.
You've really baited me in a lot this episode.
So much. It's been great.
There's just the community's been testing me a bit this week, and I don't really want to get involved. Like I'm past my days of caring enough about card games and stuff to be constantly arguing with stuff with people on Reddit and trying to convince people of my opinions. Like different people have different opinions, that's fine. But I'm just sort of trying to explain what my feelings are on these, and please don't try and engage me in an argument about it.
So good. I even baited you into a mini rant about your rants, so that's
it got very meta. Well, I think this is a gigantic episode, so thanks everyone for bearing with us. It's safe to say that we are very excited for the new set to come out. We haven't even seen all the cards yet, but I just can't wait to be playing with them. It really feels like Shurima. This set, I think they've done a great job with making the different regions feel different. It's going to feel very different and unique to play with, so I'm looking forward to that. I don't know. What do you want to say?
No, I fully agree. I can't wait to see the new cards, and they should be out next week. So I guess we can talk about them then.
Yeah, I don't think they'll be out by the next podcast F we have. So we'll have to think of something to talk about next week while we're just desperately waiting for the new set to come out. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and yeah, get excited for Shurima. I think it's going to be brilliant. As always, check out our Discord, follow us on Twitter and all that sort of stuff. We appreciate the support, and we will catch you all next time.
See you, everyone.